at Baptist Seminaries of Kentucky and Professor and Religious Studies Chair at Simmons College of Kentucky, Dr. Lewis Brogdon. African Episcopal priest, womanist theologian, and the inaugural dean of the Episcopal Divinity School at Union Theological Seminary, Dr. Kelly Brown Douglas, and dean of Morehouse School of Religion and author of the books The Art of Eloquence, The Sacred Rhetoric of Gardner C. Taylor, Reparations and Reconciliation, Preaching Economic Justice, and also Lifting the Veil Over Eurocentrism is Dr. Joseph N. Evans. And when I mention your name, just give a nice little wave. Attorney and Emmy-nominated producer, crack in the system, founder of Tone Talks and co-founder of ADOS, Antonio Moore. We've also got writer and political analyst, founder of Breaking Brown and co-founder of ADOS, Yvette Carnell. We also have here in the virtual building, American philosopher, political analyst, author, and public intellectual, Dr. Cornel West. And last but certainly not least, we are proud to have our very own senior pastor of St. Stephen Baptist Church, president of Simmons College of Kentucky, Kentucky's oldest private HBCU. He's earned a doctorate of ministry degree and is pursuing his second doctorate. And his new book will be released this fall. It's a biblical commentary on ADOS entitled Getting to the Promised Land, Reverend Dr. Kevin W. Cosby. That's our lineup. We welcome you to the ADOS Town Hall, brought to you by the National Coalition of Churches for Reparations. So let's get this started. Bringing to us the opening prayer, opening up this discussion with the opening prayer is Reverend Dr. Frank Smith Jr. Dr. Smith?
Let us pray. Our gracious God, we thank you for this opportunity, for the vision to gather churches around this nation to deal with the topic of advancing toward reparations. We ask, Father, that you bless the visionary, that you would bless those who support this vision. Father, we recognize that our nation is sick with its sin and its transgression. But Father, I thank you that you have given us hope through churches to promote a gospel of transformation. And we believe in you, Father, and we're calling on you to work through us to effect the necessary change for this nation as it relates to this subject of reparations. We pray for every panel participant tonight. We pray for all who are watching. And we ask, Father, that you move in a mighty way in the midst of this event. This we pray in the name of our Lord Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Dr. Smith, thank you so much. Hey, leading us in the Black National Anthem will be Dr. Marguerite Henricks. Right, we're having a little bit of technical difficulties hearing. All right. All right, well, we're getting that worked out. That is Marguerite Henricks, and she is the founder of the Bay Area chapter of the ADOS movement. We're going to move to the next person. Okay, why don't we move to the opening statements, and it's going to be brought to you by Reverend. Okay, there we. Okay, we got it.
We got it.
Oh, there we go.
Greetings, I'm Dr. Marguerite Heinrichs, proud founder of the ADOS Bay Area chapter. Lift Every Voice and Sing, often referred to as the Black National Anthem, was written by James Weldon Johnson in 1900. Originally written as a poem, it was set to music in 1905 by his brother, J. Rosamond Johnson. In 1919, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, dubbed it the Negro National Anthem for its power in voicing a cry for liberation and affirmation for African American people. It is now featured in various Christian hymnals and is sung today in churches across North America. Please join me in singing the first verse of the Black National Anthem. Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Marguerite Henricks. That is one bad sister. And on top of all the other wonderful things she can do, she can sing too. My goodness. Hey, welcome, welcome, welcome. If you're just now tuned in, we want to welcome you to the first National Coalition of Churches for Reparations, to their ADOS Pastors Town Hall, the Justice Gathering. Opening statements will be brought to you right now by Reverend Dr. Keith G. Tyler, and he is the senior president of the Progressive National Baptist Convention, and following him will be president of the National Baptist Conventions of America International, Dr. Samuel Tolbert Jr. Dr. Tyler? You're on mute. Okay. There we go.
Okay,
there you
good to go. Loud and clear. Thank you so
Yes.
much. We want to bring you greetings on behalf of our national president, Dr. Timothy Stewart. I serve as the president of the Midwest region, and we are just excited and delighted to be a part of this panel. My opening statement is very brief. I took out some time to kind of look at Zacchaeus, and Zacchaeus was one, as you well know, that was up in the tree, and he saw the Lord, and the Lord said, "Come on down, Zacchaeus, man, come on down. I want to invite you to salvation." And so he goes to Zacchaeus' house, and Zacchaeus is converted by the master. And reparations is a part of that particular biblical narrative. And reparations, of course, as you well know, means to repair. And so Zacchaeus is saying, since I've met you, oh God, I'm going to give half of what I have to the poor. Said, I'm gonna give half what I have to the poor. And then Zacchaeus said, I'm going to restore fourfold to those that I have taken advantage of. What are you saying, Keith Tyler? What I'm saying is, how much money would it take to repair the damage that has been done to a people of brown and black descent over 400 years? Not only how much money, how much power, how many legislations, how much land would it take? How much would it take to repair the damage done? How much would it take to repair the damage done psychologically, emotionally, to the mother of Emmett Till, to that descendant, to the boys of Jacob Blake that watched their father shot 7 times? How much would it take? This quest continues, and we continue to fight against this beast of injustice. So on behalf of the Progressive National Baptist Convention, where I serve as the regional president, in the words of the NAACP, the struggle continues. It was William Augustus Jones that stated so well that the rich are on welfare. In his book, God in the Ghetto, he said, but their welfare is reduced down under other names like tax breaks and farm subsidiaries, airline subsidiaries. And he went on to talk about how that the Black community is a plantation without fences. And so as we continue to bring liberation and freedom to our community, to our culture, to our people, to our history, we say together, we shall overcome. God bless you. Thank you so much for this time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tyler. Looks like we're ready to head into the discussion. It's time for the panel discussion. And I'll go ahead and toss it to Dr. Lewis Brogdon, who will be moderating this conversation. Dr. Brogdon?
Thank you, Crystal. Good evening, friends. We are excited about this wonderful opportunity that we have to join a conversation that has surprisingly been gaining momentum in the past few years because of the outstanding leadership of some of the people who are on this panel tonight, particularly the founders of the ADOS movement. More attention has been given to the issue of reparations. And there is a colloquial expression that says that often the church, they are the taillights of society. And what that means is that usually they are the last to get on board. They're the last to see the relevance and the need for change. And after they see the taillights, then they decide they want to do something. And so Dr. Cosby wanted to convene this time for us to join the conversation and to get out ahead and out front on this issue by engaging these outstanding panelists and leaders in a conversation about reparations and its intersection with scripture and important issues in the Black community. And so we're going to have two segments. The first segment is going to be dealing with the role of the church in a moment of social upheaval and change. And I want to begin with you, Dr. West. And my question is what is the prophetic tradition? And where do you see it in 2020? Oh, your audio. Turn your audio on.
Sorry, could you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Oh, no, I was just saluting you. I was saluting you. I was saluting Sister Crystal too, but the captain of the ship here is, of course, Brother Kevin Cosby. In terms of his church, the school, the love he has for the people. We want to thank him for all the work that he's doing. And then we got Sister Yvette and Brother Tone, who are the two major forces trying to make reparations a centerpiece of any serious talk about Black freedom. They come from a tradition, but they have been the ones doing this now. And then, of course, my dear Sister Kelly Brown Douglas, who I've known for over 35, 40 years. She's still as strong as ever. And Brother Evans, what can I say about dealing with the genius of geniuses of the pulpit, the great Taylor himself, Gardner Taylor himself. And I could go on and on, but briefly, that the prophetic tradition simply tries to keep the bread of life fresh in a cold and cruel world. Therefore, it makes available the good news of the gospel, but it's able to do that in such a way that it's willing to pay a cost. So when you are prophetic, you decide to be in the world, but not of the world. You decide not to conform yourself to a status quo, but to transform that status quo through the witness that you bear. There's a wonderful line in Sly Stone's song, Sing a Simple Song, where Larry Graham says, I'm loving, knowing, loving, and over loving. See, that's how you know the prophetic folk, because they're overcoming whatever's coming at them. Pain, suffering, oppression, domination, exploitation, lies, and they're doing it through love, but it's a love of a truth, and condition of truth is allow suffering to speak. It's a love of a God who was manifest in the flesh, who died on the cross of a Roman Empire and love was so over loving that the empire couldn't crush it. It was unstoppable. And those of us who are disciples of that Jesus are part of that love flow, on that love train. That's how you know the fruits of prophetic folk. You see it in their courage, you see it in their vision, you see it in their overloving, and they're overcoming through their overloving.
Dr. Douglas, where do you see the prophetic tradition in 2020? It would be great if you and Dr. West could kind of converse a bit about the prophetic tradition, because a lot of times that's a popular term that gets thrown around about being prophetic and the prophetic tradition. But where do you see it right now?
Yes, thank you. And I want to join in Dr. West and thanking all of you for the work you do and are doing to indeed keep the prophetic tradition going as we have this discussion, and I hope more than a discussion about reparations. And so it's nice to be here. And so thank you for this conversation. Let me simply just add on to what Dr. West said as we talk about the prophetic tradition. So I want to sort of start up here and then maybe bring it down to, so where is that today? Where is sort of the church in this 2020 when we talk about the prophetic tradition? I think that when we talk about the prophetic tradition, we're talking about a tradition that reimagines justice, right? And reimagines justice not in relationship to not simply the status quo, but to the present. But justice becomes the sort of the imagination, the reimagining of justice is accountable not to the present realities, but is accountable to what we may call God's just future, right? And so that you are always standing then over and against the present realities in as much as they are not reflective of the future that God has promised us all, right? This just future where I like to say where the first are last and the last are first, not because there's a reversal of fortunes, but because the first are last, the last are first. There is no distinguishing between the two. Everyone is respected as the sacred human creatures that they are, period. Now, so this prophetic tradition, it seems to me, historically, for instance, we see, I always think, I think of those who were born into slavery, who died in slavery, never ever thought that they would breathe a free breath. In fact, never did breathe a free breath, didn't dream that they would breathe a free breath. Yet they fought for freedom anyhow, right? And so they're fighting for a freedom that they know will be, because they're holding themselves accountable to a freedom that is the justice of God. One last thing that I'll say about there, and Dr. West spoke to it, is that the prophetic tradition always moves through the cross. And that means, we have to remind ourselves that Jesus wasn't crucified because he prayed too much. Perhaps because he prayed, it allowed him to go to the cross, but it wasn't that he prayed that got him to the cross. And so the prophetic tradition is always a tradition that goes to the cross. Now this means this, and so that this will answer where we see it emerging today. The cross indicates that the path to God's just future always begins with the crucified classes of people in any given time and space, with the people who are on the most underside of justice, right? And so it's when those that are on the underside of justice, those crucified classes of people, when they say, oh, that feels like justice, then we know we are at least on the arc toward the just future that God promises us all. So where is it? Right? The prophetic tradition, it's where the church, if they're going to be church, because to be church is to be a follower of the one that indeed died on the cross, then where is the church, right? Aligned with, in solidarity with in listening to and lifting up the concerns and not simply the pain and the suffering, but the aspirations, right, of those who indeed are struggling for freedom, but freedom, they can't find it. Those on the underside of justice, the crucified realities and the crucified communities of our time. That to me, the seeds of a prophetic tradition. Otherwise, yeah, if the church finds itself anywhere else but there, then it's not being church, and it certainly isn't the prophetic tradition.
And pastors, I think it's incredibly important in this moment of social upheaval and change that you don't always equate the prophetic tradition with the institutional church, because institutional Christianity has shown the suffering of masses of Blacks. So I see the prophetic tradition and I see the church being vibrant out in the streets where people are protesting and giving voice to the injustices that institutional Christianity has really kind of grown accustomed to. And so I find that a little promising. And I think that would really help pastors to really don't always equate institutional Christianity with that prophetic tradition. Dr. Cosby, if you can jump in and go ahead and turn your mic on. Why is it important yet unpopular to be prophetic in a country that has a two-party system? And I want to get you and Yvette to kind of spend some time really unpacking that, because, you know, one of the challenges in being prophetic is how you align yourself with power. And so there's some unique dynamics with our two-party system that makes being prophetic challenging. Could you weigh in on that?
Thank you so very much. And I would like to thank Dr. Evans and Dr. West and the very brilliant Dr. Kelly Brown Douglas, and two persons who I think best personify what the prophetic tradition is, and that is Yvette Carnell and Antonio Moore. E. Stanley Jones, the great missionary who wrote the book on Gandhi that influenced Martin Luther King, said in his book on Gandhi that Gandhi said to him that the problem with Christians is not that Christians reject the gospel, but that Christians reduce the gospel. And that we have reduced the gospel to what Dr. King called pious irrelevancies and sanctimonious trivialities. When I think of what it means to be part of the prophetic tradition, if I was to use an analogy, it reminds me of the movie starring Jim Carrey called Liar, Liar. And in the movie, Jim Carrey, for some reason, has no filters. And he can't help but to tell the truth. So he alienates everybody because he does not sanitize the truth, or as Cornel West would say, he doesn't deodorize the truth. He tells it like it is. So the prophetic tradition is antithetical to a pragmatic tradition that I think captures the politics of present day Black leadership. I think it's a pragmatic politics instead of prophetic politics. And it tells the truth. For example, it not only tells the truth, if you're talking about a Frederick Douglass, he not only told the truth about slaveocracy and slave religion, the slave religion of Jefferson Davis and Basil Manley, who founded the founders of the Southern Baptist Convention. He tells the truth about the slave religion, but he also tells the truth about the gradualism of Abraham Lincoln. So it's almost like, well, what side are you on, Frederick? Are you with Jefferson Davis, or are you with Abraham Lincoln? And Frederick Douglass would say, I am with the Basileia Theos, I'm with the kingdom of God. And so I must speak the truth like Amos not only to the end to Israel's or Israel's enemies, but I have to speak the truth here in Bethel and tell Amaziah to let justice run down like righteousness and like justice run down like righteousness and like a mighty stream. And the same thing happened with Martin King in the last year of his life. He was a part of the prophetic tradition and was criticized by Black leadership of his day because of the prophetic tradition. Namely, you know, you have Nixon and you have who has adopted the Southern strategy. And here is Nixon, who wants to reverse everything that was done in the civil rights struggle, law and order without justice. And here King, he comes out not only against Nixon, but he comes out very harshly against Lyndon Baines Johnson in his, and you know, and condemns the Vietnam War. But he has no filters. He speaks truth to power. And that is the type of prophetic tradition that I think is missing. That I think, and that's why I so admire Yvette and Antonio, because they represent the continuation of the prophetic tradition. Because not only are they calling Trump a neo-fascist, as he is, who is the worst political figure since Jefferson Davis, without question. Trump is the worst person since Jefferson Davis. But we cannot be blind to the fact that Biden implemented policies, namely the policies of mass incarceration, and made his name by pandering to the same racist impulses that Richard Nixon did and Ronald Reagan did. Now, that's just a fact. And prophets tell the truth. That is why prophets tend to be lonely. And I think that what is missing is that there are too many careerists in Black leadership, and not enough prophets, I believe, so, who are telling the truth.
Yvette, jump in there.
Well, I mean, I agree with Dr. Cosby, but I think we've kind of gotten stuck in this kind of minutia, if you will, this space where nobody wants to speak truth to power, because a lot of us have seen what happens to people who speak truth to power, right? You know, when people talk about even violence in the streets, no one wants to see that. But you see it as kind of a consequence, as opposed to this kind of built up frustration. And then when people say, like, why does this violence happen? Why does it happen? And I say, well, King was a man of peace and you gave him a bullet. And so, you know, America is teaching us things. And so when you talk about the prophetic tradition, and when you talk about this kind of speaking truth and speaking what is truth and what truth is, as opposed to kind of what is sanctioned. See, a lot of our politicians kind of speak within this narrow space of what is sanctioned to say. So I can say defund the police, but I'm not allowed to say reparations. I'm not allowed to come here and say I want a demand, and a demand that is owed. I'm not allowed to say that is not sanctioned. And I know that I will be kind of isolated, and I won't make it to certain spaces if I say this group and these people are owed something very specific. And I think in terms of how we have to move going forward, you know, what was said earlier, you know, about being in this world and not of it, that's who we are, and that's how we have to move. We have a lot of people who will say that and who will quote that scripture and then go and move in totally the opposite way, in a very careerist kind of way. And so it makes those of us who are willing to be that and move in that way look like outliers. And we become outliers. We look like fish out of water, only because other people are unwilling to tell the truth and be who they say they are and show up as who they are, not as who they are sanctioned to be. I see a lot of, you know, when you look into politics now, it's almost like a lot of people are like these little wind-up dolls. And you know I can tell you exactly what a lot of people are going to say before they even open their mouth, because I know what's sanctioned to say. But what is sanctioned to say isn't necessarily the truth. And what we need and what we require in this moment are people who, everybody knows what the truth is. There's nobody, people will tell you that it won't ever happen, or people will tell you that, you know, white people won't ever let it happen, but nobody will ever say that this is not true and this is not due. And I think when you know what that truth is, you have to say that truth. It's not your job to kind of armchair politic it and be a weather vane for America. Your job is to speak the truth of what we're owed in our community. And I think we all have to live up to that.
Woo, that is fantastic. Dr. Douglas, question for you. Can there be racial reconciliation? I mean, real racial reconciliation without reparations?
Well, of course,
I'm giving you the easy question there.
Right, the quick answer is no, right? But let me start somewhere else. And that is, I think the misfocus, and that's not a word I can't, of reconciliation. And what we're talking about when we talk about reconciliation. I think that reconciliation, we have focused this notion of reconciliation, which can we meet again kind of notion, between peoples. I think that's misplaced. That what we have to do as communities of faith, as church, and by the way, to call ourselves church is aspirational, to live into that. But what we have to do as people, as communities of faith, as church, is to talk about reconciliation, not in terms of communities of people, but in terms of reconciling ourselves to the justice of God, to God's just future. There is a breach, right, in terms of where we are as a people, as a society, and this thing called God's justice. If indeed we began to move toward filling this breach of justice, then all other kind of reconciliation will take care of itself. So that what we have to focus on is moving toward justice. What does justice look like? And reconcile ourselves to that model of justice. And so now, how do we do that? First of all, and I want to sort of develop something, play off of something that Yvette said in talking about the violence. We've got to first recognize that injustice is violent. We've got to recognize that violence does not begin by the time violence gets to the streets, is a part of a wider cycle of violence. Racism is violent. White supremacy is violent. Anything that degrades in any way the humanity of another human being is violent. Poverty is violent. And so we are talking about bodies that are trapped, Black and brown bodies that have been trapped in a cycle of violence. Even if we're just talking about right now about poverty, a cycle of violence that is about indecent housing, lack of opportunities for healthcare, employment, recreational opportunities, and the list goes on. So people are trapped in what I call crucifying realities. These are violent realities. To be Black in this country means to have been trapped in a cycle of violence, at least since 1619, right? And so to people who are oppressed don't initiate violence. And so the thing is, how do we begin to eliminate this cycle of violence? That's going to require, yes, some form, keeping in mind that there will never be economic reparations enough, right, to indeed repair the breach between that slavery, quote unquote, has created, and the complexity of that breach. Because we have to keep in mind that slavery wasn't an episode in this country. Slavery is upon which this country was built. And so how do we begin to sort of repair that, or make pay for that, if you redress that? There won't be enough money to redress that. But we began to redress that, not simply by sort of economic paying ancestors of the enslaved, et cetera, and those kind of things. And then the systems of violence continue. But we began to repair that again by preparing the breach between a just future and where we are now. We've got to eliminate these systems and structures of violence. And that begins with recognizing, of course, the violence that white supremacy has bred. So can we have reconciliation without reparations? No, because reconciliation for me is about reconciling ourselves to the image of a more just future. And if we talk about that, as opposed to start talking about sort of reconciliation between blacks and whites and all of that kind of thing, if we start talking about what justice looks like, then that other kind of reconciliation will take care of itself.
Dr. Evans, can you join in? You've written a book on the topic of preaching reparations. You know, what's the role of the church in the reparations debate and advocating for reparations?
Well, first and foremost, thank you, sir, for being our moderator tonight. You are a kinsman of our home state, and I appreciate you being here. To all who have spoken and will speak, if this was theological athletes, all of you would be on a Wheaties box. And so it gives a little space for me. So we're talking about the role of the Black church, and I can really piggyback on a lot of what has been said, but let me try to do it this way. Reparations is a theological motif. It's a justice motif, which makes it political. And it's political because reparations is a way to humanize, namely Black people and other oppressed people, because we have been socially marginalized, so we lack access to resources, healthcare, education, housing, many of the resources that, frankly, we have been denied since 1619, right? Reparations is a way to humanize the oppressed. And that means the counter to that is that we have been dehumanized. And so reparations is the future. And it is prophetic for us to frame the narrative. Now, let me, for a moment, explain what I mean. To be prophetic, we have to frame what truth looks like in the sights and sounds and smells of our own zip codes. So, for example, in this political context, it will be very difficult, in my view, for people to receive reparations playing inside of the current Eurocentric box. The Eurocentric box currently is neo-conservatism and neoliberalism, which defines the two major parties in our country. And we can say neo-fascist. The Republican convention was clearly a neo-fascist convention, hiding underneath patriotism to demonstrate that hegemony and supremacy is what they are grabbing onto. So we have to redefine what America needs to look like, and for that matter, a global context, because I don't think that people of African descent here in the United States are going to receive liberating reparations by ourselves. I think we have to frame it in a global context. Wherever Black folks in the diaspora have placed our feet, we are subjugated to white supremacy and empire. And for us to really connect with brothers and sisters in the diaspora, then we're going to have to deal with our Negro pathology that too often is what is in the church. So that prevents us from joining organized liberation marches. That prevents us from taking hold and claiming our children who are in Black Lives Matter movements, who are on the cutting edge of what it is to be prophetic. Now, one of the things the institution can do is when we hear the prophetic, we can reflect on it and then make it perhaps more broadly received by other people. But I'll just sum it up by saying that we're talking about the prophetic tradition. Now, I've written somewhere else that Du Boisian prophetic tradition is something that we cannot dismiss. I think the Du Boisian prophetic tradition started simultaneously with the Pan-African Congress and conferences of 1898, 1900 in London and so forth. Julia Cooper was at that event along with Du Bois and Trotter and a couple of AME bishops. But the point is that early on, when colonialism was ending and post-colonialism at Bismarck's time, the German chancellor, I think he was the German chancellor, and they were organizing how to exploit Africa. It was at that time that we had brothers and sisters who had the foresight to start a counter-hegemonic narrative we call Pan-Africanism. Alexander Crummell perhaps could be considered the father of Pan-Africanism. There was a barrister, a Trinidadian barrister, Brother Sylvester, who was also a part of that. So we've had a long tradition moving from the Du Boisian tradition into the Harlem Renaissance writers, who frankly should be considered as progenitors of what we know as the civil rights movement. Those were also brothers and sisters who grew up in the church tradition, but wrote really a secular word that could help us fight empire because they were trying to rid us of the Negro pathology. Then we get, of course, into the time of the civil rights era. But simultaneously, a new strand of liberation was birthed. We call that the Black Liberation Movement, or excuse me, the Black Panthers, right? And we see that proceeding today, even through hip hop and now even to Black Lives Matter. So there is a chain stitch that moves throughout the sense and sensibilities and the hopeful expectations of people of African descent. So I'll just simply just recap and say, whatever we're doing, we cannot avoid the political. Theological motifs and proclamations of justice is always going to be political, but we cannot fight politics in a neoliberal and a neoconservative context because that doesn't have a lot to do with Black folks. That's European. That's not for us. We've got to figure out how to speak for ourselves. And I think that has to become a part of the discussion. And we have to have public theologians. The pastor has to be a public theologian. We have to speak in the public square and in the institutional spheres.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. To kind of use some of the language Dr. West was talking about before we came on air, we're gonna flow with the spirit. But I want Antonio to come on and to talk about why do African Americans need reparations? Because I mean, he is fantastic. You know, he just hits you with just mountains of data that really help you to see the need for reparations, especially when you think about where the Black community will be by 2053. And then we're going to circle back around and just kind of let panelists ask each other some questions before we transition to our next segment. So Antonio.
Well, it's nice to, finally get to chime in a bit. I guess what I listen to everyone speak now. My position is that a lot of Black folks don't know enough about Black folks. And when I say that, they don't know enough about the economics of today. So they're talking like it's 1970, but it's 2020. And so in reality, as you start to unpack this thing, have you talked to Darity? Have you talked to the Federal Reserve? Have you talked to Cornel West? Have you talked to Byron Allen? Do you understand the condition of Black wealth today versus 1970? Are you still talking like it's 1970? And the problem with the Black church today is it's stuck in 1970. Can we pull up the first chart, the wealth gap chart, if possible, Hicks, and we'll start to frame this discussion. When you start to understand wealth in America, well, let me say this, let me back this up. What I started to understand is that our race has built itself out of another time, even though today is 2020. So let's just start here, Hicks. White America has 90% of the wealth. We have 2.6. But the problem is, hold on, 90% of it is in the top 20% of our families. So those 20% church-going Black boomers, retirees with their pension in their homes. Nothing wrong with having a pension in a home, but what is your political obligation to the next generation? Are you going to continue to talk to us about another time where we talked about Pan-Africanism in the context of an Africa that was trying to free itself from colonialism? Or are you going to talk about an America today where I firmly believe, had it not been for what we saw in South Carolina, ADOS would have been in position to push for reparations today? No different than California. I'm saying this because I'm starting to look at this thing, and the bottom half of the race is worth less than $1, negative $200 billion to be exact. Primarily our young people. Not because they didn't try. They went to college, they just have student debt. And they have student debt because we failed them politically. And so I'm looking at this discussion, and can you bring up the actual gap chart? Because that's the one I need. What I start to see is that we talk without numbers. And when you don't have numbers, you can make up words. But when I look at it, I'm just looking at this chart just to kind of frame this discussion so we get out of like the generalized discussion. When you think about wealth in America, in 1970, white folks running around with about $5 trillion in wealth. Black folks have 2.6 of it then. You get to 1980, and Reagan is coming into office, deregulation, they only have about $11 trillion. By the time 89 comes around, they have $25 trillion of household wealth. Well, over the course of my life, over the course of Yvette Cardell's life, they have jumped to $100 trillion in household wealth. And I say this because a lot of what is happening is we're still talking like they only have $7 trillion. But hold on, that's not the whole story. Inside of this, you also see, if you look at this chart, Obama gave them 30 trillion of it. The same Obama that Black folks in churches and colleges voted for. In addition, of their 100 trillion, 20 trillion is liquid wealth. That is the white churches that are in Louisville that Dr. Cosby has to compete against. But in addition, we as a race have about $5 trillion, with only 350 billion with a B being liquid. We are a wealthless group at this point, holding on to a relic of ourselves. And I say this because I fundamentally believe that ADOS is a pathway for us to recognize we can not afford to be less imaginative or look at history. We have to look forward to the future. And if we don't do that, we will not survive this moment. Can we pull up the actual voting chart? Because I want to get into a bit of a discussion. I know this is a church function, and a lot of you guys are nonprofits and can't speak, but I don't come from a nonprofit background. I hear right now Black folks being told, vote for Biden and Kamala, but not why. When I look at it, Black folks been voting for Democrats, rightfully so, because of the policies that they push versus Republicans, but they're not telling us why this time. When I look at it, in 2016, we voted for Hillary at a 90% rate nearly. No other group came close. White America voted for Hillary at a 37% rate. They gave us Trump, they need to fix Trump. And I'm saying this because when we start saying this politics, we got to start talking about what does that politics look like? How do we converge a world of this poll with that data? And the way we do that is with ADOS. So now let's get specific. How does ADOS do that? Well, ADOS does that by showing up at the Supreme Court steps when Al Sharpton did not. I'm saying this because you can do as many marches as you want about Jacob Blake. If you don't show up at the Supreme Court steps for the Civil Rights Act of 1866 and our Black churches are not there, I don't know how your children will survive. ADOS101.com provides a very specific agenda. It does not connect to Pan-Africanism. I'm sorry. But what it does do is tell you that right here in America, it's more than enough wealth that we saw with the CARES Act, that we see with the HEROES Act, that we see with all of these forgiveness programs that is here and that we must make a claim on. I think fundamentally we've gotten too wordy. And in doing those words, we got away from numbers. So I come back to it. If there's $100 trillion gap today, what do you think it'll be in 10 more years? And I say to you that the politics of this moment, the reality of this moment has to move beyond just remembering who we were when Black churches, see, let me say one thing about what I see, and I've talked to Dr. Cosby extensively about it, and he's welcome to agree or disagree. The Black church was birthed out of that moment that I'm talking about before, actually several moments, but let's specifically talk about the 70s. You have post-civil rights and you see Black folks getting the jobs at the USPS. You know, just today I read an article, 27% of the USPS workers are Black folk, twice our actual percentage in the population. So Black folks are starting to buy homes. Black folks are starting to do this with no student debt. What I say to you is, what happens in a world where there is no post office job? And what I also say to you is, what happens in a world where we ignore the reality that is no longer a gap of 11 trillion or 24 trillion. It is now $100 trillion. And the only closure, and I'm sure of this, whether I talk to the billionaire Byron Allen or the economist William Darity, is reparations. And when I talk about reparations, I'm not talking about that global kind that you get at the UN. I'm talking about that national kind that you get right from our own treasury.
You still have some more, Antonio?
The only other thing I would show is if we can show the iceberg chart, because I think that let me shout out ADOS all across the nation, from ADOS and DMV. Understand these chapters are organically developing and growing themselves. These are grown people that for far too long didn't have a place to put this politics. But these chapters, whether it be California, who just played an instrumental role in the California reparations bill that just is going to Gavin Newsom's desk. We have the ADOS language. I don't understand how reparations works without recognizing that ADOS are a unique people, no different than Haitians or Jamaicans or Nigerians, respectfully so. But we are a unique people built out of the oppression here in America. But in addition, you have Georgia putting on events like we saw with Gwinnett with the NAACP. You see up in DMV, they organized and were in front of the Supreme Court steps, even when the NAACP left. But I look at this chart, this image that somebody from ADOS created, and what they were able to show is we can continuously focus on the tip of the iceberg, the George Floyd of it all. You know, I showed you the redlining maps of cooked foods in Minneapolis, told the story about the Somalians and how they were invited versus George Floyd was disinvited. I broke down all of these realities, but George Floyd, as horrendous as his death was, is the tip of the iceberg. Under the water is where you see the cost, from no universal health care to starvation of wages, to mass incarceration, to systemic police brutality, to lack of opportunity, to racist politicians, racist justice system, unaffordable education, and most importantly, no reparations. I think now what's interesting is how we're getting to a point where people done forgot that reparations a year ago or even 2 years ago was a very foreign word. I'm not talking about in educational spaces. I'm talking about nationally. What actually happened is that a group of Black folks kept telling me and Yvette, what's the solution? So then we got with Dr. Cosby and the Angela Project and with Darity and started to brainstorm what that solution looks like. And that solution has to stay in the hands of those folks who started to create it, because otherwise it becomes some kind of fictitious like idea of things. Close the racial wealth gap. How are you going to do that? How can we do that here? Can we do that here? And I believe it's possible. I just need people to stop standing in our way.
Fantastic. All right, panelists, let's take about 5 minutes just to kind of have a little dialogical time. You can reply back to Antonio or some of the points
what I want to
mentioned
do
during this
is
first
just,
segment.
I want people to take a look at this book. This is From Here to Equality, Reparations for Black Americans in the 21st Century. This is by Brother William Darity. You all know him as one of the most sophisticated economists of his generation. And our dear sisters, Kirsten Mullen, who is also a towering writer and intellectual in her own right. But here, the story is told, the empirical data is put forward, the arguments are put forward with tremendous power. And it's important that we have some kind of empirical base when we engage in these dialogues. It's very important for the moral and the spiritual. I think Tone would agree with that. I mean, we are spiritual people. You see, you don't just present facts to folk, but the facts have to be grounded in the stories of who we are, and who we are a spiritual people that have always understood the crucial role of morality, courage, integrity, honesty, decency, service to others. But this text is very important. I think it overlaps with what Brother Tone is talking about in a number of different ways. I mean, if I have any critique of the text, it would be that last moment, the acknowledgement, yes, redress, absolutely. Closure, see, I don't believe in closure when it comes to white supremacy. Because if you have slavery, if you have Jim Crow American terrorism and ongoing racist discrimination, it's going to be ongoing for a long time. See, white supremacy is not going to go when we get reparation. It's that deep in the white supremacist imperial democracy experiment that the United States is. And I do believe it's very important to have solidarity with people all around the world, not just people oppressed in Africa and Latin America and Europe and so forth and so on, but we've got to come with our own specificity.
Right.
So that the depths of our ROOTS enables us to have integrity in our ROUTES. If you jump to your routes that you take and you're not grounded in the specificity of your own roots, then you get taken. And I think this is, yes.
The thing I would add is Yvette Carnell had, other day said one of the most powerful things. Reparations is a down payment on justice. Now, the reason why I say that it's an important down payment is no different than what Byron said during my interview with him. He essentially said that if you don't have no money, it becomes hard to have a voice here in America. So we look at Kenosha. Kenosha, their city budget, this is where Jacob Blake died, is $82 million, as I was saying off camera.
Right.
30 million of it is police budget. 18 million of that is patrol. What money does is it puts you in those rooms as a homeowner in the city council so that they're not policing your community and not policing white folks' community. So it starts the process of allowing us to have an actual voice in these rooms. Now, it don't change that these rooms got them Confederates, that these rooms got white supremacy. But I think what has happened right now, coming back to it, is we don't really get what 100 trillion work looks like in white hands versus 10. It is a vastly different world now. And inside of that world, if it's out of hand. That's the best way I can put it.
But you remember now on page 244 of this text, and it's almost like the Holy Ghost is working, where he says, if we can't transform animosity to reparations to support, then it's going to be very difficult to even make the claim vis-a-vis an imperial racist U.S. nation state. Because the argument is it's got to go through legislative bodies. It's not going to be judiciary. They make that clear. And we are seeing more and more support.
Yeah.
Not just on the chocolate side of town.
Yeah.
But on the vanilla side too.
Yeah.
It is galvanizing. That's what I mean by the Holy Ghost working. It's galvanizing. Because when Malcolm X, I remember sitting with Randall Robinson with the debt when we were part of the Reparations Committee going back in the 1990s, where they had like 1.5% of white folks supporting reparations. We had a chance to snowball in hell. I first met Queen Mother Moore in the 1970s. Same issue, chance for snowball in hell. No, what you two have been able to do is you've got timing, historical timing, and the massive impoverishment of our people. So that reparations becomes a last weaponry, given the greed at the top.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just vanilla greed, but it's mainly vanilla greed, but we got chocolate greed too at the top.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, I'd like to get in there. Okay, Doctor.
I'm sorry, we're going so long.
Wait a minute, I think Dr. Douglas, and then we get you Dr. Evans.
That's fine.
Just very brief to ask very quickly. I agree with and obviously the analysis, the wealth gap, but here's the thing, and listening to you, Cornell, and Antonio, that we have to also, we're talking about so we need to change the wineskin. I mean, we're talking about white supremacist capitalistic systems and structures. And if we don't do something about a capitalistic system and structure, which automatically exploits, finds bodies to exploit, and we're talking about a white supremacist capitalistic structure, then we're going to be having this conversation over and over and over again. And so it's not simply about reparations within a system. We've got to talk about changing a system that has created this situation in the first time, a system that has commodified, essentialized, made Black bodies essential workers, but not essential human beings. And that's what capitalism does. And so it seems to me that reparations has to go beyond simply trying to bring people on the equal footing, and that's within an unjust capitalistic system that is built to exploit.
Can I respond to that? And I think that, I think that I would agree with Dr. Douglas. I think, however, just like a bird has two wings in order to fly, if the Black community is going to soar, we have to deal with what you're talking about, Dr. Douglas, and that is the issue of class. But fixing class does not fix race. And we have to have something specific as it relates to race. And unfortunately, whenever we talk about justice for Black people, it is always a class agenda. It is only when we begin to talk about the specifics and the uniqueness of ADOS and the unique justice claim. The scripture that was read at the beginning of this discussion was the discussion of Zacchaeus in Luke 19. And there were two pots of money that Zacchaeus spoke about. One was a class pot of money for equity. So he says, a half of my goods I will give to the poor, which means redistribution in terms of class. But then he says, if I have defrauded anyone, I will restore them fourfold. In the American context, Black people are owed the second pot of money because of how we have been defrauded of our wages. And the whole class agenda has overshadowed the race agenda. I think that one thing that we have got to do, and I think Antonio was alluding to this, is that when people ask me, what is ADOS about? ADOS is about three things. Identification. By the way, the phrase ADOS comes from Dr. King's last book, Where Do We Go From Here? That term, ADOS. But it's about identification, concentration, and reparations. And by identification, who are we in a society of mass immigration? Who are we specifically? This is how I define ADOS in terms of identification. If you can say yes to the following 7 things, and it's an acrostic for justice. If you could put that on the screen, Michael, this is who we are. If you can't say this, and this is what Darity would say, this is what Antonio was saying, this is what Yvette, this is the whole ADOS movement. If you can't say yes to this justice acrostic, J stands for Jim Crow. If you can check, yes, I was a victim of Jim Crow, pre-1964, you're ADOS. If you can say yes to urban renewal, yes, 1948, when the Supreme Court ended restricted covenants and began the whole process of urban renewal from 1948 to 1970, yes, I was here. If you can say yes to slavery, that I can trace my lineage to slavery. If you can say yes to terrorism, which is lynchings, incarceration, cops and courts, and exclusion, that makes you a unique and distinct group of people in the United States. And the reparations that this government must pay should be directed towards people who can check those 7 boxes. And it's a justice claim. And while we must have equity and class justice, there is something specific that is owed to the people who can check those 7 words.
We're gonna get Dr. Evans. We missed Dr. Evans, and then we'll come back to you, Dr. Douglas.
Well, thank you. I think I heard a historical claims. In other words, we divorce ourselves from the history of our struggle. I may be mistaken. Secondly, and by the way, if that is true, then I think that is a mistake. Reparations in the end is going to be a legal or a legislative decision that will more than likely could be challenged in the Supreme Court. And with the current makeup of the Supreme Court, we would not win in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is stacked with both neoliberals and neoconservatives. That's why I said earlier, you have to change the narrative. If we try to fight within a neoliberal or neoconservative box, it's going to be very difficult for us to advance. I'm trying to remember the name, and I hope one of the other panelists may be able to remember the name. And it's late for me, and I don't think as well in the evening time, but one of the best books I've ever read on the reparations struggle was written by the former, he may be the current chancellor of the University of the West Indies, Sir Hilary, I can't think of his last name, but anyway, he wrote a brilliant book about the reparations that is due to brothers and sisters in the West Indies because of British occupation and British subjugation of people in the Middle Passage or the diaspora. So I'm going to go back and reclaim, I do not think that we will be able to recognize whether it's restorative justice, whether it is let us say punitive justice, without the help of people from other spaces. We have a lot of resources here in the United States, but we need to frame the story so people can grab it. And that is to tell a story that transcends our particular context. And we'll find out that what has happened to us here in the States has happened to Black people across the diaspora. And so I would be very, very cautious to divorce ourselves from that, allies from other places. But we don't want to, I wouldn't want to be ahistorical going forward because we wouldn't know where we have been to know where we're going. A final note on that, I'll go back and say that I heard someone say something about constructs. I think it was Dr. Cosby, and I had written down the race, economics, and politics was Du Bois's construct that we had to overcome. He would probably add gender to that now. Because if you have a relationship between race and economics, that's capitalism. Capitalism functions as long as racism functions. And then if you think about politics and gender, you're going to have a class struggle within a category of women. I like what Dr. Brown has done in her womanist theology, because she makes a distinction between womanism and feminism. Feminism generally is something that European women want or they back. Womanism, I think, and she can correct me as I'm wrong, is a critique on that, as much as is also a critique on male hegemonic practices, right? So going forward, I think all of it can be on the table. I don't have a lock on it. But what I do know is because of the historical trace that we have, we can see the progress we have made. And we at least have a guidepost for where we're intending to go.
Can I just jump in? Just a quick word on this. because I mean, one of the points made in Dougherty and Mullen's book is the Federal Reserve is a public bank and it can exercise public responsibilities. So when Summers and Geithner and Sperling and all these folk got together and gave Wall Street $13 trillion and then gave them QUE as a public bank, but it was to private elites, that the Federal Reserve could give $11 trillion to Black people right now if they wanted to.
Yes,
they can give it to community banks if they wanted to. It's a public responsibility. You see what I mean? So it seems to me we can have both and. I mean, I'm not going to give up my citizenship. I want every citizen to have free health care. I want every citizen to have quality education. I want we talked about this at the conference in October, right? So we got a train of citizenship where we make sure you got citizens. Then you got Black people who have been anti-citizens, sub-citizens, non-citizens, second-class citizens, and public institutions like Federal Reserve can do what they want, even without the courts, it seems to me. And that's a very important argument that they make there, I think, Brother Evans, that we have to wrestle with. And we can still have solidarity with our brothers and sisters in the Caribbean and Africa. And I mean, we could be with Dallas in India and so forth, but we still could turn to our specific predicament because the suffering is so overwhelming. Without reparations, we're not even going to exist.
I don't think it's either or. Let me jump back in. Dr. West mentioned my name, so let me get back at my good brother who is very intelligent on top of it there.
Absolutely.
I agree with you that it can be more than one rail.
Yes, there you go.
But it ain't worked so far.
Well, neither one, no rail worked for us so far.
Yeah, but we haven't really tried the other one, Dr. West.
Yes, we did.
So we have to try both.
See, that's the thing. You're just talking. I met with Karen Bass for 2 hours. You know what she told me? It doesn't happen in the courts, and it doesn't happen by the legislation. It happens by people. What we need for the church to do is just stop telling us what can't be done. Look, if you don't think it can be done, just step to the side. Let me show you that it can be. I'm telling you that 100,000 ADOS people with no white donations have ignited this discussion to the point where it was on a presidential stage. And I'll tell you right now, the Democrats didn't want it there. I'm saying to you, I know it can be done. Yvette, you want to jump in? Because you haven't got to say nothing.
Let me just jump in really quick. Because this is a church conversation. This is a Christian conversation. And I want to jump in with something we said about being in this world and not of it. There are specific stories in the Bible. I don't care whether you're talking about Israel, Egypt, Pharaoh. These are specific stories of liberation. And nobody said there has to be, nothing can be done unless it's global. Nobody ever said that. Even when you're talking about church, nobody ever says, when somebody comes into your church, what do they say? Well, I paid my tithes to the diaspora. We have a specific justice claim here. Now, nobody is opposed. I support CARICOM. If Haiti ever gets their reparations from French, I will be the first one to dance on their behalf. But what you are doing right now in the conversation that you're having is really kind of work avoidance. And you're talking about what cannot be done. And that is not Jesus' justice. We don't talk about what can't be done. It's just like we live. Listen, oppressive forces are oppressive forces. They have a lot of things in common. We all recognize the kind of evil that we see at play right now. You're not going to confront that evil by saying you're going to change the conversation or change the narrative or change the dialogue. This is what it is. And the reason that it resonates is because it's true. Everybody knows that it's true. Everybody knows that this is the route for the Black freedom struggle. You don't do that by saying that we have to go through a global kind of mechanism. Now we can ally. We can ally all day.
That's precisely what I'm trying to say, sister. I have not said, if this is pointed toward my comments, and I don't mean to cut you off, but I enjoy your passion, and I believe you're more right than anything else. What I am trying to say is that we have to look at more than one route. Now, if you had read some of my own previous work, you will know that, for example, I have called into question institutions in the United States that have built their wealth on American free labor and called them out on their free labor. I'm merely saying that in order to create a narrative for all of us to follow, we would do well to use that same narrative and see where it intersects with other oppressed peoples. I don't know what the outcome is going to be. I'm merely saying that including Black folks from other spaces is a good thing.
They're
There's a
already
problem.
included.
There's a problem
They already
with
have allies. They're already
me-
included. But the second thing is this is working. Look at the people who we have to do edits on HR 40. We all know that. But look at who signed on after we started doing this. Look at how many signatures you've had after this. Look at the polling on reparations, how it is going up. We don't have to change the narrative when the narrative that we have is working.
In addition, I think that from a legal standpoint, and this is like everybody got state, I guess, to me, their lanes, and like Black America lost its lanes. Darity is a leading intergenerational economist, and in the book and I did a report with him that was on Fortune magazine. We did this report about Black wealth. Everybody said, what's the solution? So we unpacked it in terms of reparations. What I think is starting to happen is that because it seems so imaginative, people can't really step back and say, everyone saying, I don't know enough. So let me use an example. CARICOM's claim is all those islands and also several other coming together and making a claim in a global court. Our claim is here in America. That's a fundamentally different claim. Now, don't get me wrong, I respect their claim. But I don't see anyone saying to them, slow down. We need to see if American claim can be folded into yours before you bring yours to the international court, because that's wrong. Their islands to get to do what they want to do. We got to stop treating America like a transitionary country, like it's some kind of middle country between a real country and, say, the Caribbean islands. No, this is a separate place. Now, before 1965, we come back to it. Part of the problem is that we, not just in terms of economics, but in terms of immigration, we've created a narrative around Black immigration that didn't happen. Before 1965, the amount of Black immigrants in this nation were to the right of the decimal. If you go back to 1920, almost all the Caribbeans are in New York City. There's about 30,000 to 40,000 of them. There are 11 million ADOS people that are 5th and 6th generation in America at that point. The reason why this is important is because this is our argument. So when you say, can we all fold together around just a general Blackness? It's no different than you saying, let's all go to Jamaica today and start folding into their claim and start making assertions about what they have to do in Jamaica. No, they have their claim. They're doing what they should do. Here in America, we haven't done that body of work. What ADOS is trying to unpack is not only the identity element, which we shouldn't have to do, but also the economic element, which we shouldn't have to do, just to get to a point for everybody to understand it is possible. It is possible to give American descendants of slavery enough wealth to close that gap. Now to one other point. Dr. Kelly, excuse me, I'm just meeting you and I appreciate everything that you said. I think one of the things that people misconstrue about reparations, I'm not saying you're saying this, is that it is money. No, it is a transformation of the structures of society, because that's the only way you can close that kind of gap. Let me use an example. As an example, when we look at white wealth, what we have to understand is that almost they have 83 million homes, we have 20 million. That's a 1-to-4 ratio. 15% of their families are worth more than $1.2 million. A full million are worth more than $10 million. That million families owns almost all the resources in America. If you look at Black America, there's 20 million families. Only 350,000 break $1.2 million. The reason why I know that is because I did the work with Matt Brunick to pull the micro data from the Federal Reserve to show how many Black millionaires are there. And those are largely 1.2, 1.5, 1.7 is their house and their retirement. So the reason this is important is what we've started to do is not understand when we talk about reparations, myself, Darity, Yvette, Dr. Cosby, we're talking about that restructuring, but that restructuring requires us to unpack government as well. Like you're saying, we're not just saying just, and I'm not saying you're saying this, but a lot of people misconstrue it. We're not saying hand Black folks a certain set of money. We're saying, why don't Black folks own enough to make their own money? Why don't we deal with these structures that have put Black folks on the bottom, ADOS Black folks? And when I say that, I mean, when you look in Los Angeles, the city of the Color of Wealth report that I just cited at the California Senate shows that it's not our color. It's not being from Africa, because the middle African family in Los Angeles is worth $160,000 hard, 60 of it being liquid, while the middle native Black family is worth $200 liquid in Los Angeles. In Miami, if we go down there and we look at the Haitians, they're worth $2,000 liquid, according to the same report done in Miami. The middle ADOS family is worth $11 liquid. This is about lineage. That's what this is. And until we understand that it's about lineage, we will lose this battle.
Yes, this has been, I mean, this has been electric. Just a wonderful conversation.
Wonderful.
We do want to make sure we have just a couple minutes to, because I'm sure the chat box has been exploding on YouTube and Facebook. Do we have enough time for maybe 2 questions, Crystal?
Dr. Douglas, we omitted Dr. Douglas.
It's just brief. One, yes, I agree, and thank you, Dr. Crosby, Antonio. And I'm not talking. That's what I'm talking about: changing structures and systems. And it's not an either or; it's a and. And I am also not talking about an either or when it comes to class or race. I'm talking about if we don't understand the intersection of those two realities, we're going to continue to be in this situation. So we're talking about a racialized, I call it a white supremacist, capitalistic system and structure. And when we're talking about reparations, I am in perfect agreement with that. We are talking about the gaps that are not simply wealth gaps in terms of money, but wealth gaps in terms of realities of living, if we will. And so it's not either or, it's both and. And so I agree with that. Let me also add that I do have to get off of here by 9:30 because I was supposed to get off at 9 and I extended it. So if I disappear, it's not because this isn't a wonderful conversation.
Yes, and thank you so much.
Hey, Dr. Brogdon, I just want to remind the viewers, I tell you, our chat room is electric, it's hot right about now. A lot of statements, a lot of comments, but the second half of this discussion will include your questions. So please pose your questions in the comment section and we will be getting to that next in the second half. We're going to take a quick break and show you this video. If you're just now tuning in, though, thank you so much for tuning in to the ADOS Pastors Town Hall, the Justice Gathering, brought to you by the National Coalition of Churches for Reparations. Check out this video.
The National Coalition of Churches for Reparations is a divinely inspired movement with the purpose of galvanizing churches and believers for the advocacy of reparations. The George Floyd moment greatly changed the landscape of our country. Thus, at this pivotal moment, the NCCFR is asking every clergy member and church to join us to advocate for change. Reparations is a dilemma. Reparations is biblical. The church has always been American descendants of slavery's saving grace. Like those who have gone before us, we must get the revelation that there is a need for a coalition of churches to become our people's same saving grace. To sign up to be a part of this God-ordained movement and receive information on the NCCFR annual 2-day conference, visit nccfr.org. For more information on ADOS chapters in your area or how to start an ADOS chapter at your church, email adospastors@gmail.com.
All right, we are back to the question and answers portion of this program. Dr. Brogdon, I believe I had sent you some questions in the chat, but I can go ahead and ask the first one.
Yes.
Someone had a question. They say, why do we always have to Pan-Africanize our struggles? Every group in the diaspora have their own unique plights. Someone want to take that question?
Well, since I'm the one that brought it up, I think I'll take the first crack at it.
Dear brother Evans, go do it.
Well, I appreciate the dialogue. I'm going to stay where where I am. I do think that there are ways that we can say not either or, but both and. But I am committed to the narrative that in order for us as people of African descent to overcome empire, I believe it's going to take a narrative that's shared among Black people and what our commonalities are. One of the fears that I have is that we as Black folks in America are too closely tied to the system. And we try to stay with it. In other words, we want to take from the system, but we need to change it. Now, I did hear Brother Antonio speak of transformation, and I do agree with him in that respect, that we must transform the system. And I think reparations not only is an economic boon to our institutions, but it is also to our psychology. But I do think we do need to think about our brothers and sisters in the diaspora, because together we are the wretched of the earth, as Frantz Fanon said. And to pretend as we are not, or to neglect recognizing that we are a part of that struggle, I personally contend that that would be an error.
Mm-hmm. Can I just say something about that? Because it seems to me, first, just as Christians, you see, love is one and love is many things. So that I don't see a contradiction at all between the Pan-Africanist narratives that are countervailing forces against white supremacy as a world system connected to predatory capitalism and imperialism. That's just a fact. And our greatest people who have loved us, the Du Boises, the C.L.R. Jameses, the Ella Bakers, we can go on and on. They loved us enough to tell us the truth about what it means to get caught in an international system of white supremacy tied to predatory capitalism and imperialism. At the same time, Pan-Africanism, what gives Pan-Africanism its content is the specificity of Africans in certain contexts, national context, regional context. That's the difference between a Louis Armstrong and a Fele in Nigeria. That they both African, they both geniuses, but one comes from Adolf. The other comes from a specific moment, a slice of Nigeria. So the Pan-African movement has to be sensitive to that specificity. Now, when you're in a moment in which your empire is collapsing, in which our love for Black people, especially our love for Black poor people and working people, is so devastating that the last form of weaponry could itself be reparations. That's the only thing left for the survival of our people, let's argue. Now, if that's the case, then we have to, and I'm going to stop on this because this is very important in terms of how the ADOS movement is perceived, because it's easy for people to have misperceptions and misunderstandings of what it is in order to dismiss it, rather than to get at how this is coming from the people themselves who are wrestling with levels of impoverishment and degradation and disrespect, right? Even among their Black middle classes, even among their Black bourgeoisies, you see. And that we have to listen and say, oh, how is the spirit working now, given that love is one and love is many at the same time? And I think we have to have this openness across the board. I mean, I'd say the same thing about the Nation of Islam, right? I got a love for Minister Louis Farrakhan. He didn't say Hitler was great. He said he's wickedly great. They told lies about him to dismiss him. Now, I don't agree with everything he said, and we fight about it, but I love my brother. And when I see new Black groups coming on the scene, or groups on the scene that are easily dismissed and easily pushed to the side, when there might be certain crucial reflections of what's happening among our people, we have to be sensitive to that, it seems to me. We got to be jazz-like. We got to be flexible enough to say, what is going on? I got to listen to what Tone and Yvette say. They saying something so different. It's different than Queen Mother Moore because it's a different historical moment, but it's the same tradition too. It's just new circumstances. That to me is what is crucial as we relate to each other as Black people, as Christians, and as freedom fighters as a whole. You see the point I'm trying to make? So it's both and, but it has a certain content of both and that makes us understand the crucial role of what Tone and what and what Sister Yvette are talking about, even given the fact that Black people will never be free across the board in any grand way unless you overcome predatory capitalism, the imperialism, the kind of thing that so many of our Pan-Africanists who are revolutionists have talked about.
Right.
I want to end with this question, because again, I just can't thank you enough for taking your time tonight to be a part of an important and a healthy conversation. But I want to pose this particularly to Antonio, Cornell, and Dr. Cosby. And it's the politics of the moment. So some members in the African American community, they worry when they hear all of this increasing talk about reparations and the ADOS movement encouraging people to vote down ballot. Why now? Why not wait until the November election and then advocate for reparations? Is this encouraging Blacks not to vote? So I think the political question is the elephant in the room, and I would love to hear you, a couple people message me about this question, and would love to hear your response to it.
Well, let's be specific. We said down ballot Democrat. And the reason why we say Democrat is because Black folks largely, like I showed earlier, don't have wealth. And in these local areas, Democrats tend to be the more liberal of the two. But the problem that we run into is something happened in South Carolina. I've projected my beliefs are that Kamala and Biden were not supposed to come out of South Carolina. Because good brother Bernie, as Cornell was supporting, was supposed to come out of South Carolina. They binded together. Kamala did not run the race she was supposed to run. As a result, Biden was able to take South Carolina because of what happened with Clyburn. So in a sense, I believe with Bernie at the top of the ticket, you know, we have a discussion through Nina, through Cornell, through Killer Mike that we can't have now. So the question becomes, now that you posed the decision between Trump and Biden, have you, in a sense, taken away our vote in and of itself at the top of the ticket? So instead of posing that question to me, you should pose it to the DNC party. Why did our vote get taken? So let's talk a little bit more, just to be specific about everything that's going on. Black folks in America don't have a tomorrow. They only have today. COVID-19 is upon us. Understand that in reality, the middle Black family is worth nearly nothing, the working age Black family. The only thing binding this community together is the boomers and the retirees. So when you say, can we wait? The thing I ask you is, what are we waiting for? Because if I wait, my student loans are due. But if you have this boomer that has retirement and they wait, they still got a house they own. I don't have time to wait. And the fundamental thing is that we gave you time to not make this about waiting. We talked about this a year ago in October in the conference. We talked about this 2 years ago at the Angela Project in Philly. We talked about this 3 years ago at the Angela Project in Louisville. At a certain point, you have to come to an understanding that they're not going to listen to you as long as you wait. So now we come to a point where you need the Black vote, the Black male vote, and you decided to put Biden at the top of the ticket. He didn't just give us the incarceration bill of 96. He is the architect of the carceral state as we know it. So you put him with Kamala Harris, who in effect led to truancy and lived on incarceration, and you say, well, you got to choose between them and Trump. And I say to Black boomers that are part of these churches, how did you leave us with this choice? We told you we didn't want them. I know in 08, you said we didn't say enough. Well, in 16 and in 20 particularly, we told you very loudly on the cover of the New York Times, in fact. So I look at this thing, and the last thing I'll say is, our first Black president was Kenyan and white. Our first vice president, very likely, is going to be Jamaican and Indian. Our first attorney general is Bahamian. So I come back to what Dr. Evans so eloquently put forward and ask the question, is it a coalition if at the end of the day, all these firsts ain't none of us? And I'm saying to you that to me, that isn't gonna work. And ADOS is here to put a gate up. And I know that might not be good and happy, make everybody happy, but I'm doing it for the next generation. I'm doing it for the Black. See, understand, I'm an attorney. I don't have to do this. Most of Black attorneys, in fact, I feel like it's not enough YouTube channels. Why is it just me and Yvette? We have enough educated Black people. Why is everybody quiet? Because they think quiet is gonna get them along. What I'm saying to you now is the last moment for us to say something, because tomorrow after COVID, it's not going to be pretty at all based on the economics.
Dr. Cosby, Cornell?
Well, I mean, one is that I think the issue of solidarity on the one hand, the issue of what it means to be a Negro, ex-Negro, ADOS with other Black folk and non-Blacks as well. And the fact that, and I think Brother Tone would agree with this, he said, if Shirley Chisholm or Malcolm X or Stokely Carmichael were in power, none of them 100% Negro, all got Caribbean connection.
Yes.
But they got a love for Black people. You see, love is something that cuts deeper than what your identity is. But so that even in Obama just didn't have enough spine. His experiences were limited. He didn't have enough spine. He could have been more radical, and he chose not to be. But the fact that the white power structure has a fear of free Black people who love Black people, and especially the ADOS types. But not only, because ADOS can sell out like anybody else. We know that's a human thing. So I hear what you're saying in terms of the emergency, the sense of urgency that is taking place in Black America that must be recognized, and the degree to which my generation and the degree to which Black leadership and Black church leadership has failed young Black folk and failed Black poor and working people. That has to be acknowledged. And then the question becomes, how do we push reparations? Along with transformation and citizenship? We still got the two tracks going, and we still got Pan-African solidarity. We care about what's happening in Haiti. We care about what's happening in Jamaica. We care about what's happening in Kenya and Uganda and so forth. But we don't lose sight of the specificity of ADOSicity.
Right.
Dr. Cosby?
Yeah, I think it takes us full circle to what we started the conversation with, and that is the prophetic tradition. And I think in this moment, one thing that disturbs me, Vincent Harding, the great Vincent Harding, the great historian, talked about Martin Luther King as our convenient hero. And he says in his essay that we love dead heroes. We build monuments to dead heroes because they are not around to question how we have reshaped their image. King, who is the greatest public intellectual that America has ever produced, and prophet, if he was here, he would be speaking, of course, against the neo-fascist that's in the White House.
Oh, absolutely.
He would also be speaking as full-throated to the neoliberal movement that has decimated Black America, especially Black men.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
My problem is that we don't have the prophetic voice in the church and many of our quote unquote civil rights organizations. My mentor, Dr. Matt King Carter, said that what made Jesus so powerful is that he didn't want anything. The most dangerous person in the world is a person who don't want nothing. He said all Jesus wanted was to be his father's child. And it's hard to be prophetic when you're looking at one hand to represent your people, but on the other hand, you're looking for crumbs that fall from Pharaoh's table. You're looking for positions. You want to be one of the pundits on MSNBC and CNN, and you know that to speak prophetically about neoliberalism will counsel that. Dr. King's last year, after he gave his denunciation of the Vietnam War at the Riverside Church in April 4th, 1967, was his wilderness year, in which every newspaper rejected him. The civil rights movement rejected him. Carl Rowan rejected him because he was speaking truth to power. I think that we have to speak truth not only about the evils of the present occupants of the White House, But I do think that we have to ask Biden and Kamala some serious questions. And what frustrates me is that the only person in the last 12 years who has been willing, the public intellectual, to ask these questions forthrightly is the person who's a part of the panel, and that's Dr. Cornel West.
Mhm. Yeah, Dr. Bragdon, may I just put a two? Where did and by the way, is Yvette is still here in Antonio?
No,
Yvette had to go and do her show.
Starts in 30 minutes.
Okay, I didn't want to be rude.
No.
Let me tell you something about this fellow sitting on this side of here. Let me tell you why I am committed to reparations, committed to being an advocate for the oppressed, and believe that ADOS is probably the voice in this country that's going to help us get there. It wasn't until I started traveling to the continent, to the Caribbean, and other spaces where I started questioning my own identity as a Black man. In other words, I wasn't really a Black man. I was in color. I was my mama, my daddy, and my granddaddy and grandmama, everybody, my sister, my wife, children, all that. But I really wasn't a Black man because I thought like empire. I had been trained to think like empire. And so in respect to that, through double consciousness, I defended empire. But when I started seeing Black people in other spaces, I realized that I was more of a pathology of a Negro than I was as a Black man. I learned that from people outside of my context. I didn't learn it from in my context. I would have never known it in my context. And so for me, because of those, first of all, just because of the dehumanization of people everywhere, and particularly people of color, I'm committed through Jesus of Nazareth, my Lord. But in addition to that, I have seen what it means to be the wretched of the earth, where the sun goes down in the middle of the day. And I am committed to doing all that I can to include people in the struggle. Now, I'm not going to tell anybody else what strand or species they should take. I'm not that naive or arrogant. I don't have a lock on it. But I want a context where it's not either or, but it's both and maybe another rail that I have never thought about. And so I just thought I would share that as we go forward.
Can I say one thing? One last thing? Dr. Brogdon?
Yes, go ahead.
One of the things that's become very interesting ever since Jesse Jackson, he didn't coin it, but he introduced it to the major national platform, is African American, continent country. I myself have traveled to Africa, traveled to the Caribbean, but the idea of a vast continent the size of Africa with the most diverse set of people being a placehood. Inside of Africa, the people are diverse like we've never seen, tribal like we can't even relate to in America. In America, I've told Dr. Cosby this, you can be a barber in Los Angeles and tomorrow cut hair in Philly, and there is no tribal difference between you. That is not the nation of Africa. As I understand it, I might be wrong. Maybe you've experienced it differently. But I say this, the problem that we're having right now, most with reparations, is that people don't believe in reparations. What do I mean? I'm saying this, who is going to receive the benefit? It's got to be, like, if you don't believe that reparations should come from a specific actor in the American government, and I'm not talking about private actors even right now, and go to those families that are here that have to live and go to schools like the one that you teach at, the one that Dr. Cosby is the president of, the one that Cornel West has taught at, and spend real money to actually go to these schools, then I don't know how we go forward, because real money has to be spent to survive. So let me say it more specifically. The question I almost have to ask the Black church, the congregation members, the pastors, is do you believe that ADOS are a unique people? And do you believe they should be repaired? Because if you don't believe those two parts, then fundamentally, we're kind of just floating and hoping everything works out. Reparations has to go to a specific people and be paid by a specific actor. In my world, that's the government of America, US government, who I know has the money, and those specific people are the descendants of American slavery and American Jim Crow. I think that, like, I guess for me, I think other countries have been given the right to have that position, because and then when this is new terrain for ADOS people to stand up and say coalitions are nice. Because understand, we believe at our conference we had a Jamaican speak. Shout out Serena Harris. We had a Jamaican speak. We had a white man speak at our conference. Shout out to Paul Sowers. So we not against allyship. But what has happened, and I'll leave it at this will be my last word, is that the cost of allyship has led to an erasure of ADOS. So our first African-American president wasn't African-American. He was Kenyan. That wasn't built for him. Our first African-American vice president isn't African-American. She's Jamaican-American and Indian-American. So where does my daughter go or my son go? And I guess I'll leave it at that. That's what I think is the ultimate consequence, possibly, of going down a path of not being specific and drawing boundaries.
Can I just say one last word?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
this is a beautiful.
And then Doc, you close this out, Doc.
And we're talking with brothers and sisters, and the important thing is that we all know that we all have our strengths and we all have our weaknesses too. But we also have our stories that are singular and unique within a singular and unique people. So, for example, when I thought about Blackness, I got it from Malcolm. I got it from the Black Panther Party.
Boom.
I got it from the League of Revolutionary Workers.
Mm-hmm.
I got it from James Brown. He said, say it loud. I mean, so that those are voices from inside of the empire. That in my case, because Brother Evans has his own wonderful story. In my case, I already got that Blackness from the inside. So when I went to Jamaica, I went as a Black man with this rich tradition as descendant of white supremacist slavery in the American US empire, Jim Crow. They didn't have Jim Crow, they had slavery. That's all right. Bob Marley's relation to Curtis Mayfield, Bob Marley and the Impressions. He's imitating a genius from Chicago. They're still Black, but they got specific Blacknesses, as it were. And therefore, if we lose sight of our specific Blacknesses, and the white power structure wants vague Blackness in order to ensure that they never speak to the deep poverty of the least of these in our communities. And they will use whoever they can, new immigrants, bought off Negroes, sell out Black people, whatever it is. They'll use anything they can not to speak to the depth of the suffering of Black poor working people, no matter what. And as Christians, we got to be able to see through that trickery. As we acknowledge our uniqueness as persons, as families, as stories, we're the unique people. Negroes are a unique people. That's a fact. When I say Negroes, I'm talking about the ADOS, but I'm using old school language. I don't want to be offensive to nobody, but I'm reflecting my own history. Because that's Negro capital N. That's what Du Bois and them willing to die for. He's my brother too. But we decided to be Black. When Jesse came up with an even vaguer category, it became even easier for the trickery to be used that lost sight of the plight and predicament of the least of these among ADOS. And as Christians, we can't allow that to happen. Not on our watch. We have lost younger generation, poor for the mass incarceration, working people to wage stagnation, because our leadership has not had the vision and the courage to be able to speak to their predicament in a way that could bring them in and allow them to do what they need to do and to straighten their backs up and so forth, and listening to their own voices. So that's why I think this discussion is so very, very important. And it's already taking place all around the nation, in part to what Brother Tone and Sister Yvette and others are doing. And thank God, you know, with what our dear brother and others who are part of it. And we don't all agree. I mean, Brother Tone knows that I believe we're in an anti-fascist moment. And so a vote for Biden ain't got nothing to do with his ugliness in terms of mass incarceration. So it has to do with pushing out a neo-fascist gangster. And as soon as Biden gets in there, we even hit him harder. But I'm going to be in solidarity with Tone is doing no matter what. We just got a strategic difference. That's all. That's all right. That's all. He want to vote down, vote down. But this thing is bigger than us.
And understand, we said voting. Let me say one thing about voting down, because I want to be clear.
Sure.
What's supposed to happen is we were supposed to be having a conference and have the pressure to put Biden or whoever was the nominee on at that conference. Our goal is an agenda. Biden still has time to deliver that agenda. The question is this black, and it's not even a boule, it's really like this black boomer class of folk that have decided to vote for Democrats, regardless of position, of platform, going to stand in way of us making that demand. See, because we easily, Biden needed the black vote coming into South Carolina.
Oh, yes,
where was the deliverables for us giving him our vote? Yeah. And it didn't happen. So now we still stand in the same position. Biden, if you're listening, if any of your campaign are listening, let's talk about a black agenda. Let's talk about reparations. And we're not talking about HR 40 as it is. We're talking about HR 40 with the ADOS edits, where we look at ADOS people and the amount that's due. And as Dr. Evans pointed out, structural change, where we look at a global reality as well. And we start really having a discussion that needs to be had. But if that don't happen, down ballot Democrat.
One last thing before Dr. Cosby comes. I like what you just said. I like what everyone has just said. And we do come to our own identity in different contexts in different ways.
Sure.
And if we're honest about that, then we have these types of discussions. But there's one addition to what I was hearing. I had a friend of mine, well, actually a relative, who is one of the leading imam in the country. Started out as a Christian, chose the path and imam. And he and I were talking one day. I went to the mosque with him, and after we came from the mosque, he said something profound to me. And this was in like 1980 or so. And this is what he said.
Wow.
He said to me, being objective, not talking from my context, but I trusted what he was saying. He said that we were not politically mature enough to go to the liberation motifs. In other words, he was trying to say that what you're talking about, Brother Antonio, that's the objective. That's where we want to go, but we have to continue to mature into it. There are a lot of people, frankly, I believe, and I voted for Bernie Sanders twice. I voted for him in 2016. I voted for him in the primaries. This time, I believed in Bernie's agenda and still do. And I'm going to vote for the lesser of the two evils because I can't have the neo-fascists stay in the White House. That was not my agenda. My agenda was something else. But we have to continue debating like this and discussing like this and educating like this, so that our brothers and sisters, as we understand it, mature into a more mature political agenda that's for us. And that's why I started out by saying we've got to change the narrative. We can't talk about neoliberalism and neoconservatism inside the box, because it really doesn't help Black folk and it does not help oppressed folk. And it's not intended to help us. That's the point. And so we have to be insurgents into that system. Now, as soon as November 4th comes, we got to start over and try to build a coalition so that we are ready for the next elections. That's my view. And I yield back, and thank you for letting me speak, and thank you for letting me be a part of this. I love my brothers and sisters because, like you, I have a jazz sensibility, baby. It's going to come back.
This has been a fantastic
That's
forum.
it. That's it. That's it.
It's very, very healthy in this moment of social upheaval and social change that we have this kind of critical dialogue. I like where Dr. King ended his last book, Where Do We Go From Here? Really listening to and engaging the Black Power movement. And I would encourage you, pastors, to don't get into a defensive posture in this era, but be open to listening to voices that are new, because it's going to breathe a lot of fresh air into your churches and into our communities where the desperation is so real. Dr. Cosby, final comments, and I'll turn it over to Crystal.
I want to thank you, Dr. Brogdon, for doing a phenomenal job facilitating the discussion.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And
Superb.
You were outstanding, and you were. I'd like to also thank Crystal Goodner and all those who are behind the scenes, making the technology possible, to Dr. Cornell West, Dr. Joseph Evans, Antonio Moore, Kelly Brown Douglas,
ADOS members,
all the ADOS members. And I want to give a special shout out because this whole idea of a National Coalition of Churches for Reparations was not conceived by preachers. It was conceived by Christian lay people who have been educated by Antonio Moore and Yvette Carnell. And I'd like to call out and give a special thanks to the visionary of this this forum, and that is Kimberly Davis, and that is Amara, April, Tiffany, Phyllis, Reverend Hosea, Minister Keith, and Michael Hicks. I'd like to thank all
Thank you. Thank you. We know Amara as Princess, so that's how we know her.
And then one thing we did not do, and that is as we close out, and that is if Michael could pull up, and we'll close with a scripture that I think it's a good scripture, Deuteronomy chapter 15, verses 12 through 14. Deuteronomy 15, verses 12 through 14. And this is what Dr. King basically said, about 6 months before he was assassinated at Ebenezer Baptist Church, that when we were fired by Abraham Lincoln, we weren't freed, we were fired. He said that we both got freedom and famine at the same time. But listen to this scripture, Deuteronomy 15, verse 12 through 14. It reads, if a Hebrew man or Hebrew woman was sold to you and have served you for 6 years, in the 7th year, you must set him or her free, released into a free life. And when you set them free, don't send them off empty-handed. Provide them with some animals, plenty of bread and wine and oil. Load them with provisions from all the blessings with which God, your God, has blessed you. Don't forget a minute. Forget that you were once slaves in Egypt, and God, your God, redeemed you from that slave world. For that reason, this day I command you, this is not a suggestion, this is a command. This is not an alternative, this is a command. So this did not happen. The scripture was not read. It says when you release somebody, release them into free life. And you can only release somebody into free life when they have been repaired with resources and wealth.
Talking good, doctor, talking good.
We'll close with the word and let the word.
You talking good, doctor.
Ooh, that's a fresh word. That's a fresh word, brother. That's a fresh word.
That's the Message translation, by the way. Message translation.
I can imagine what the King James says. Oh, Lord, have mercy.
All right, Dr. Wagner.
Hey, everybody tune in to Breaking Brown.
Yeah, Breaking Brown. Watch your bed tonight.
Ooh, she's on right now.
She's on right now. Tone, tell us about your platform, Tone, your platform.
Oh, mine's is Tone Talks. Tone Talk to be found on YouTube. Breaking Brown can be found on YouTube. I do my shows on Fridays. Yvette does hers Mondays and Wednesdays. She'll be on in about 25 minutes.
I tell you,
Crystal,
love
you wanna
y'all.
close us out?
Thank you.
That's Sister Crystal. You keep,
All right.
keep holding up the
Well,
bloodstained banner. Hold
yes,
up that
thank you
bloodstained
so
banner.
much. Thank you so much for joining us. And for more information about this coalition, please visit us online at nccfr.org. Good night.
Indeed, y'all stay strong. Stay strong.
Take care.
Dr.
Stay
West,
strong
let me
now.
get your